Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is SP and I have a knack for character action games, specifically a subgenre known as spectacle fighters / stylish action. I've had this hobby on the side where I research and try to find each and every single spectacle fighter / stylish action game that exists with the intention of playing them and ranking all of them based on my scoring system. The scoring system is based on elements that are presented in Ninja Gaiden, which I use to compare to other games. I look at that series as a complete package because it not only offers quality, it offers quantity as well. We're also going to be judging the quality of that quantity. This isn't meant to be me saying that Ninja Gaiden is a perfect game. Nothing is perfect. No one is perfect. But something people tend to overlook about that statement is that if everything in existence is not perfect, therefore that means nothing is flawed. These concepts would have to coexist. Things just are what they are. Me lowering the score does not mean the game is flawed. It just means it's missing something from the scoring system. I'm a firm believer that if you're judging a game from a specific subgenre, we have to use a franchise that is considered the king among kings. What does this particular game offer that the others don't? It's like comparing modern shooters to Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops, Halo, and Battlefield 4. Most people would agree that those are among the best. I hope that example was tame enough to not cause controversy. So, with that being said, despite a game hypothetically receiving a 10 out of 10 on my tier list, we can point out gripes and design flaws. And as I walk you through this tier list, it is my job to let you know beforehand that every negative does not result in the score being lowered. What separates me from other reviewers is that I will explicitly tell you what a game will get points taken off for. And I'll tell you what violation caused me to deduct points. No game is exempt from each rule. Each game has 30 requirements to meet, some of which cannot be applied depending on the type of game it is. Many of these review points, which I may cover later, are treated as a checklist to see if it fits in the stylish action genre or the game offers a sense of difficulty. All games on the tier list start at a perfect score of 10, then drop accordingly once we start discussing review points. Some games have actually inspired me to add review points that deduct a score while in the middle of playing them. If I can remember which games on this list actually inspired those points to be added, I will make a note and put the specific review point on screen. I'll probably redo this list in the future and add 3 to 5 more points because some games were pushing my buttons. The scoring system is meant to be based on objectivity. I will tell you what the game lacks in the area the game supersedes or stands out in. There will be review points such as this to get a glimpse of the objectiveness the scoring system is going by. The last thing I'll say is that just because I give something a high score does not mean I recommend or like the game. That is how objective this list is. There will be games that have lower scores that I enjoyed more than ones with higher scores. Before this starts, I will tell you that I did not have access to some of these games and I will find a way to play them later this year. Hopefully, I get to teach you about some games you may not have known even existed. So let's begin. I think it's fair that we go in alphabetical order to mix things up. I personally think Assault Spy is a 10 out of 10 game, but this list isn't about what I think nor what I feel. The combat was fluid and I almost never really had a problem with it. You can string stuff together pretty easily and be as stylish as you want. The bosses were a bit janky, but they were also fun to fight. And it's rare that a game actually lets you launch the bosses to get crazy damage. Now, it's not something that you can do all the time. You have to earn that by getting their, let's call it a super armor meter down. So you get the super armor meter down and then you can just unleash whatever you want on them. It's extremely satisfying and it's an indie title which didn't get much traction, but anyone in the space who enjoys games of this subgenre know about it and has played it. They call it DMC at home for a reason. It has a boss rush mode and other challenges, 2 routes that you can play in the story, and a variety of moves that you can unlock as you progress, which you can chain together to feel even more complete. It doesn't take you long to get into the swing of things, and this day and age with cringe modern humor and AAA titles, this game got a laugh out of me a lot, or a positive eye roll because you're upset that you found the shenanigans funny. Needless to say, I was enjoying myself. While I would have loved more characters to be added in this game, that honestly would have been cool. This game only had 2 violations. I may write the rules, but I'm not a point shifter. If I believe that a game caused a review point to be added and I felt strongly about it, I will not change the point deduction. Violations 4 and 16. Does it have interesting level designs? In parentheses, it states that if level design isn't a game's strong suit, then forget this point. but I have a genuine critique. Asura and Emilia have the exact same stages in their respective playthroughs. You'd expect their routes to be slightly different. While I won't spoil the explanation for that, the narrative explaining why it's a thing doesn't excuse the reuse of assets. I understand the game was low budget, so I won't harp on it any longer. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? That was actually my biggest gripe. If this whole review was about feelings, I could easily just take away Violation 4. I wouldn't say the game suffered from a lack of enemy variety, but it became very apparent that I was fighting the same enemies over and over again. Also notice how 90% of enemies were basically projectile based and it kind of started getting stale. It'd end up being a room full of homing rocket launchers and pistols. With that said, Assault Spy has earned a 9.5 out of 10, which is really good. I actually have a lot of personal gripes with Astral Chain, which I'm surprised I don't ever see people bringing up. The levels are kind of tedious, where they force you to do puzzles, which slow down the gameplay. I'm not opposed to puzzles, but if you offer me a training mode, the least you can do is give me an opportunity to test out my new combos that I spent an hour trying to do because the controls aren't that great. Not some detective sections that take up 10 to 30 minutes of your time or a puzzle. While not hard, just time consuming, the controls seem very unresponsive at times, and the legions seem to have a mind of their own even when you're controlling them. The hitbox detection or object detection on enemies seems to be unresponsive as well. Too many times that I try to connect something and it failed because my legion either didn't go high enough in the combo, or worse, my character didn't go high enough. Enemies are a bit too punishing, where they'll bombard you with attacks and your only recourse is to dodge and take advantage of the slowdown frames that Platinum games are notorious for, only to get hit and take the full brunt of the next 10 swings because you're now stun locked due to your character not being able to recover from a roll very fast. So the game basically lacks defensive options. While there's defensive legions, there's no way you can convince me that Platinum thought a casual gamer would switch between legions at the speed of light, especially when given 5 to react to certain situations accordingly. The final boss was atrocious and highly unbalanced. Many times it felt like this game was untested. Violations 4, 6, 7, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? No, not really. The only change in pace is when you get puzzles, and I can remember about 2 that stood out, which is funny because they're both technically a part of the same puzzle, but no puzzle has you doing anything different that you weren't doing before with the same legion that's required to solve it. The levels also got repetitive. It was basically the human world to the astral plane. That's the entire game. Human world, astral plane. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? Yes, absolutely. The legions. The game wants you to constantly rely on them for everything. It almost felt experimental at times. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Nope. Due to the game's broken mechanics and unbalanced enemies that test your patience more than your skills. There are some skillful things that you can pull off in the game though. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes, most enemies are just reskins of each other. Final score is 8.75 out of 10. Oh boy, this is not going to be controversial at all. That wasn't even sarcasm, by the way. The game actually does have stylish action elements, but it falls very short. Aside from the actual gameplay segments, this game is literally a quick time event simulator. I figured out some stuff while messing around to see if I could string together some stuff, but this is all I can come up with. Boom! This game had many negatives. It was basically like watching a movie, so we'll just hurry up and get this over with. Violations 4, 5, 7, 8, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? Nope. You fight people, then it takes you to the quick time event sections. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Absolutely not. Like I said, this is all I could string together. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? No to both. There were only 2 bosses I actually thought were pretty good, but nothing super challenging. I know I'm the informer and I should do a better job of explaining why, so I'll tell you to play the game and you can tell me if you struggled. 8. Is the game littered with too many quick time events? Absolutely. Oh, also, Asura's Wrath is the thing that made me add this rule, by the way. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup, Asura's Wrath scores an extremely low 5.5 out of 10. This one might be controversial, but I had to stay as objective as possible. I do believe that Bayo 1 is a 10 out of 10 game, but it does fall in line with one review point that'll deduce its score by just a bit. Just a bit! Don't kill me! While being the queen of character action games, while providing a mechanically complex combat system, decent boss fights, a balanced mix of cinematics and gameplay that don't take away from each other, lovable characters, a surprising replayability factor, which is something common for the era this was released in, secret unlockable levels which I'll count as another mode entirely known as Witch Trials, challenging and unforgiving enemies in a good way, there's not much else to say or praise about Bayonetta 1. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. But now, here's the part that's going to make some people upset. But I hope you can understand where I'm coming from. Witch time is broken in this game. Not that it doesn't work, but it works too well. Oftentimes when I was being beaten within an inch of my life, I just wait for my enemy to attack me so that I can do a perfect witch time and do a death combo on them. It's like a get out of jail free card, and before you say, so you basically have it right with the entire series. No, I do not. We'll get there. This isn't a matter of me having problems with a game. This is objectively based on review points. I would score it higher if I could. Violation 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? Yes. Witch time is extremely overpowered in this game and it constantly wants you to rely on it. The rule states that you can take away 0.25 or 0.5 points depending on the severity. So we'll take away 0.25. This makes the score a solid 9.75 out of 10. I almost have nothing to add for Bayo 2. Everything I said about Bayo 1 could easily be said for Bayo 2. They're both pretty complete packages. I believe 2 has more modes than 1, and it has more characters you can play if I'm not mistaken, but now which one do I put above the other? 2 easily. It actually corrected the one thing that made me lower Bayo 1's score. Witch time was adjusted heavily in this game, and Platinum made it so that you get less of an advantage and have to think more quickly once you slow down time. As someone who appreciates hardship, I also appreciate fair hardship even more. I won't allow the satisfaction of calling something difficult if you purposely make it annoying to deal with. The same works vice versa. I won't call something difficult if you give me an overabundance of tools to deal with every situation. Luckily, Bayo 2 doesn't fall between either of those. You have to time your dodges correctly and memorize the frame data of enemies. Bayonetta 2 is the first game on this list that receives a full 10 out of 10 score. No violations. I hope this is showing you that I'm not being lenient.
Welcome to hell, love. Too late to repent.
This is probably going to be the least controversial placement, but it's definitely going to feel like something's not right in the universe. Bayo 3 is okay in comparison to its predecessors. Interesting concepts, but the execution is lacking. The combos and stuff are nice. They changed up the fact that you can't put specific weapons on your hands and feet like the other 2 games, which kinda sucked. Viola was cool to play, but I have this gripe with every modern action game having this fixation with parrying. It's getting really annoying that everything is taking influence from Sekiro. If I had a dime for every game I played that has an allocated button for parrying attached to LB, L1B, or circle, I'd probably have almost $1, and the God of War series already gets me to 60 cents. So we'll go right into the violation it has, which is actually shared with Bayo 1, but not for the same reason. Violation 6. 6 is the gameplay based around a gimmick. This gimmick is much worse than Bayo 1. Remember that I can either take 0.25 or 0.5 away. The Demon Slave mechanic is extremely broken. I mean, it's so OP that I stopped using it after the 3rd level to gain some sort of difficulty. And they knew how broken it was because they even introduced an enemy that can't be attacked with Demon Slaves. And they must have forgot about it because it only appears like 4 to 5 times in this average time of 13 hours to beat game. So instead of 0.25, we'll take 0.5 away. This leaves Bayo 3 at a solid 9.5 out of 10.
I nearly nodded off.
Oh God, Dante's Inferno, huh? Okay, well, now that I'm looking back at the script, I realize the oh God part is kind of ironic, but this was one of the most annoying games I have ever played in my entire life. If I was to develop a game myself, I would use this as an example of what to never implement in a game. The game is based in hell, right? It almost feels as if they wanted you to be playing a game as if it was made in hell. The game punishes you for not building Dante right because you have to invest in the holy tree. There's mandatory challenge sections that took me hours to complete that should have been in a separate mode entirely. The torment just felt never ending. I turned the difficulty down to easy on the last boss because Dante is unresponsive to commands and the hitboxes were broken. It wasn't even hard. Dante just wasn't listening to me. Like, if someone was in the room with me, they'd be like, I heard you press the button to jump. Never have I ever played a game where the startup animation for a jump is not lenient. My toes were not touching the ground, but his ground slam still hit me. This game felt untested. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? No. This game is a God of War clone down to the T. It doesn't do anything innovative level design wise. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? No. All the enemies are designed to annoy you, not test your skills. I'm very honest with myself and I'll say that's my fault or I suck. Nope. I don't think there was a single time this game got that out of me. It was just, this game is annoying because I was calling a spade a spade. That was what the game was trying to do. Annoy me! 8. Is this game littered with too many QuickTime events? I think this game is worse than God of War when it comes to that, and I'll spoil ahead of time that I took no points from any God of War game for this violation. We'll be taking 1 point instead of 2. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? It felt like I was fighting the same enemies over and over again. Dante's Inferno scores a 7.5 out of 10.
Dante, help me.
Beatrice!
Please. Dante. Dante!
I like Darksiders 1. The journey was kind of drawn out, and while I'm not rating games on story, it did leave me interested in the lore. The puzzles kind of got abundant and lost my interest after a while, but every time the character started speaking, I was captivated. You got me, Darksiders, you got me. The gameplay is basically as Xbox 360 as you can expect. It definitely takes inspiration from God of War just like Dante's Inferno, but I do have to admit that Darksiders' spin on puzzles wasn't on par with God of War, but they were pretty close. Darksiders 2 definitely had the hardest puzzles and I'd probably put them somewhere up there, but more on that later. The combat wasn't too complex, but there was room for complexity and I could see it. I liked what I played and I'm glad that I got through it. As for violations, 2, 7, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Not really. A lot of the bosses are gimmicky. It's more of a, were you paying attention to the things we gave you type of deal. I won't be too rough and I'll take 0.5 away instead of 1. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes, I would say the game lacks enemy variety. You definitely need enemy variety in a game that's 16 to 17 hours long, so yes. Darksiders 1 gets a solid 9 out of 10. That's not bad.
Has prison made you a coward?
While being more of a semi-open world RPG, Darksiders 2 somehow manages to stay embedded in its roots. While I haven't delved deep into the mechanical complexity of the combat, I tried my best to string something together and it was passable. I think it's even more complex than Darksiders 1. Like I said, I don't grade things for story, but I was hooked. Puzzles got even more difficult and geez, they really wanted to draw out playtime with this one. I liked it. I want to see what they do with Darksiders 4 when that comes out. I think it only had one violation. Violation 7. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I'll be lenient with this scoring as well and I'll take 0.5. It's the same deal as Darksiders 1. This leaves Darksiders 2 at a solid 9.5 out of 10.
And the number of the riders shall ever be 4.
My fingers are going to get tired talking about DMC, so since I'm technically going in alphanumerical order, let's break that and start with DMC 2. This is one of the most mundane games I've ever played. One of the most damage-spun games I've ever played. I'm a firm believer that if you play a game and you wholeheartedly believed it was bad by the end, it'll make you appreciate the good ones you've played or are about to play. So I personally don't mind swimming through the filth. At the end of the day, I'm grateful for what devs bring to us starving people during hard times. And I don't mean for us, I mean for them. Because DMC 2 was made in 4 months, I believe. I'm sorry the team had to go through that, but the combat was pretty boring and had recycled enemies from 1. Subpar boss fights. I want to be careful with how I word things during this video because I don't want to come off as biased, but it's being ranked by the list, not me. The list is based on quality assurance. So if it doesn't meet the standards, then so be it. Violations 4, 5, 6, 7, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? The levels are kind of boring and all over the place. There's a section where you have to fight these tanks and they take 5 years to kill. Then there's sections where you have to use nothing but your guns to kill this infested helicopter. That boss fight is unanimously agreed upon to be the worst DMC boss of all time. The enemies barely fight back. Sometimes it's not clear where you're supposed to go, admittedly. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? While there's more things you can do that's a bit more complex than DMC 1, I won't act as if you can do anything absolutely off the walls crazy. It's possible though. The old DMC's biggest enemy was the camera angles. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? 100%. This game is pro ebony and ivory. And I mean a lot. You'll spend most of this game shooting. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Most of the bosses are gimmicky and you just stand back and shoot them the whole time. Guns are that OP. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? I searched it up. This game only has 13 enemies that aren't bosses. DMC 1 technically has 14. While they may have around the same enemies, DMC 2 has too many reskins of enemies which add absolutely no value, so DMC 2 gets a 7 out of 10.
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
This game was a roller coaster ride. I probably died in this game more than any other DMC, or maybe it's tied with 3. It got on my nerves here and there, like Nightmare for example. I hate this boss with every fiber of my being, but the positives definitely outweigh the negatives. Going in and experiencing Dante's story for the first time was eye-opening, and it was nice to see how the series started. For a PS2 game, it was pretty responsive, fun but challenging. Violations 2, 7, and 16. 2. Does this game have other modes? Nope. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Aside from Nero Angelo, or Nello Angelo, whichever one you want to call him, I'm calling him Virgil. Aside from Virgil, I don't see any other bosses that test the skill. They're all mostly gimmicky. I don't really walk away from a boss encounter saying, I'm getting better. I'll be generous again and take 0.5 away instead of 1. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup. This puts DMC 1 at a solid 9.
Should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
I don't know how to start this one. I'm going to try my best to give this game the props it deserves without sounding like a meat rider. I will make it known that DMC 3 is one of my favorite games of all time. This game has absolutely everything you can ask for. A story that puts modern writing to shame, lovable characters, a combat system that sparked the stylish action we know today, weapon switching, enticing boss fights, challenging but fair, wild level design, and Virgil! I have no qualms with this absolute cinema. No, I'm being serious. It literally doesn't go against any review points. 10 out of 10, no question.
Now I'm a little motivated.
I personally love DMC 4. I think the genuine consensus is that no one really dislikes it, just a couple gripes, which is honestly better than hating it. I share the same sentiment. While in a similar position as DMC 2, DMC 4's development was cut short. On the contrary, the gameplay is among the best in the series. It also has the most characters you can play in any DMC game. Dante, Nero, Virgil, Trish, and Lady. Great combat, nice bosses, some a bit gimmicky, the story's alright, and it's basically perfect aside from one thing. Violation 4.
What's the point of packing a sword like that if you aren't even gonna use it?
I'd argue that DMC 5 and DMC 4 are around the same technical level when it comes to mechanical complexity. This game is among the pinnacle of character action games, and the community wouldn't bat an eye at you if you said it was the best of all time. The community's words don't influence my score, but I have to agree with them. It can be argued that it's the best. Insane combat, memorable moments in the story, great gameplay, great characters, level designs on the basic side, nice callback boss fights, and Virgil! Now that the meat riding session is over, I'm done, I swear. I do think the bosses were somewhat pushovers. This is just me, but I did no-hit 2 bosses on my first try. I could be wrong, but that's how I'm remembering it. It was Cavalier Angelo and Eldergarion Knight for anyone curious. Something I will say before I give this game its ranking is that DMC 5 is literally DMC 3 Part 2. So I feel like if you give DMC 5 the highest ranking possible, then DMC 3 deserves its flowers as well. No violations, 10 out of 10. Even though I should add a rule for not having Lady and Trish being playable. Capcom, you are monsters. Bro, imagine a DMC game with all of them playable. Please re-release this game with a specialer edition or something and add Lady and Trish. You know how historical that would be? This game went under the radar because of IGN. I don't want anyone to think that my love for God Hand is going to influence the score, but I will admit that the moment I saw gameplay of it when I was younger, it was going to be one of my favorite games of all time. And to be real with you, I have a good feeling for that stuff. I loaded it up and fell in love, I'll admit it. I had nasty thoughts that night. This game is insane from start to finish. For anyone that hasn't played this game and you're into games such as these on this list, you need to play God Hand. The whole game is challenging even on normal. And to the people whose reviews I watched and said the comedy was childish and not modern and it's something that we've outgrown, genuinely shut up. You're the life of the party everywhere you go, huh? You're the type of person to report me to HR for making an edgy joke, right? Anyways, God Hand is an enjoyable game for anyone who really wants a challenge. It'll disappoint you if you're a coward. Challenging boss fights, an AI that's actually more advanced than the enemy mobs we fight today. I'm not kidding. Sometimes enemies in God Hand feel like fighting actual people when you get to die difficulty. Good luck learning where being good at the game gets you. 10 out of 10, no violations. And before anyone says, the game doesn't have that many enemies. For anyone that actually played God Hand, you'll understand that more enemies in this game would be a detriment. It's already hard in itself. If it was some drawn out experience, then sure, I'd make that argument. But by hour 1, an hour whenever you finish the game, you're not even done learning each and every single enemy's attack and block patterns. They're random. 10.
I love it.
God of War had me stumped on some puzzles, but the game was overall pretty fun. I felt like it did a good job of what it was trying to do. The game was pretty long. It was nice to learn Kratos' backstory. I say the boss fights were sort of lacking. The enemies were unforgiving at times. The whole game is actually pretty unforgiving. It annoyed me a lot. It definitely made me lock in each time something stupid happened. There were sections where you had to constantly stay on your toes. It's not a game for the faint of heart, but I pulled through. With that being said, Violation 2. 2. Does this game have other modes? Correct me if I'm wrong, but God of War 1 does not have other modes. This makes the score a solid 9.75 out of 10.
My life is yours, Ares.
I think this is where God of War peaked. Best puzzles, best bosses. I think 1 had a better setup for the story, but 2's gameplay was pretty dope. Those boss fights were pretty hard. I'm not really a fan of boss fights being puzzles in any of the games, to be honest, but I had to hand it to 2. I don't know who came up with them, but I was stumped on a lot of them. The grounded bosses that fought you straight up, I enjoyed the most. The level design was pretty on par with the first one. No major gripes here, no violations. 10 out of 10.
I am what the gods have made me.
God of War 3, in my opinion, had the best combat. The bosses were a bit gimmicky, but most of it was about the same as the other 2. It was the most gory and had my eyes wide, only because I was surprised that they put that in a video game. I know Mortal Kombat exists, but Kratos, chill! It had my favorite weapon in the series, Goat Gauntlets! I went the rest of the game using them because screw the other weapons. Which is also ironic because while this game has my favorite weapon in the trilogy, it's also among the weakest roster of weapons in a respective title. It was shorter than the first 2, but it earned its spot. Violation 16. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? I know I said I wasn't going to go by feeling on these, but it did feel like God of War 3 had less enemies than 2. And after how long the series has been out, they were still reusing enemy designs and assets. They admittedly got tiring. God of War 3 gets a solid 9.75 out of 10.
Hope is what makes us strong. It is why we are here. It is what we fight with when all else is lost.
I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of the new saga of God of War. The combat is very boring, you can't jump anywhere, the whole game is basically a movie simulator. I don't really have much to say in terms of gameplay because there's not much of any. It's pretty dumbed down. Violations 4, 5, 7, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? No. A lot of God of War's charm came from puzzles. They're extremely dumbed down now, and Atreus won't shut up and keep solving it for you because the developers think you're that stupid. Welcome to modern gaming. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Nope. And I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have a tough time attempting the harder combos. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? No. God of War 2018 is like if God of War was a Souls game. It's cool when Souls does it, but I'd rather play God of War, and Darksiders 3 did it first. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes, this game has way less enemies than previous titles. 7.5 out of 10.
Boy.
I'm not wasting my breath on this one. Violations 4, 5, 7, and 16. Same as 2018. 7.5 out of 10.
It is the nature of a thing that matters, not its form.
Let's talk about this one. This may come as a shocker to you, but Hi-Fi is actually one of my favorite games. This will not influence the score. I have Bayonetta 2 and God of War 2 up there, and it's not in my personal top 10. Hi-Fi is surprisingly complex and a breath of fresh air for the character action genre. There's many things the game requires you to master in order to get all the achievements and experience all facets of the game. While my only personal gripe is that there's a lack of bosses, which I hope there's an abundance of in the sequel. Be careful what you wish for, of course. There's absolutely nothing bad I can say about this game. Surprisingly, in-depth combat, nice platforming sections, lovable characters, new enemies every 20 minutes, multiple modes you unlock after beating the story, fun music, cool minigames, and it made me laugh, like, a lot. I honestly had a lot of fun playing this game, and it filled me with nostalgia, and I'm not talking about its overall vibe of a Saturday cartoon by the man of action, no. It felt like a complete character action game, or like I was playing a game made in the beginning of the Xbox 360 era when the PS2 was 9. Hopefully I live to see the next one. No violations. Hi-Fi Rush is a welcome newcomer that gets a 10 out of 10.
Here. Well, we do have more pressing matters. Might there be anyone here who knows how to fix the coffee machine?
This one's for the people that think I'm handing out 10s. I think Metal Gear Rising is a solid game. I actually need to replay it. There's some cool stuff I saw that you can do, but some of them were mixed in with tool-assisted stuff, so I don't know what to believe on the combo front, but I will install it again and get stylish. I had one little gripe that doesn't take away from the score. Whoever decided that parry was up and attack needs to meet me in the ring. You couldn't have had an allocated button for parry. When I say up and attack, I'm not talking about holding up and pressing attack. No, you gotta flick it. And when an opponent has a 10-hit string, you have to parry it perfectly, and if you don't, you have to start all over again and wait for them to do it again to get to the next phase of the fight. Bro, that's so easy to mess up. I'm not messing up due to skill. You know developers can implement how responsive that stuff is, right? There's another game on this tier list that has an unresponsive launcher, and I'm gonna rag on that too. The game was cool though. Violation 6. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick. The game constantly wants you to take advantage of the slow down time effect and abuse it against all enemies like Bayo 1. Platinum games seem to have a thing for witch time. It made multiple encounters somewhat easy. I'm taking a full 0.5 points off because you won't find yourself not using it throughout the whole game from a casual perspective. The game gets a solid 9.5 out of 10.
If America's gone to shit, you're just another maggot crawling in the pile.
NieR Automata has a narrative that I feel a lot of people don't understand. It's one of those stories that can easily go over your head if you lack media literacy. The gameplay was great, the androids were complex, and there's much more I admittedly need to experience. Many people don't discuss the fact that the story is actually a clever machine versus machine narrative. Those stories aren't tackled in the same light NieR Automata handles it. NieR Automata is a game I admittedly did not finish. I played 2B's route, but I stopped once I got to 9S or A2. No matter what I do, I can't find any kinks in my review notes. I've struggled with the placement of NieR Automata because I can't give a game a 10 that I didn't finish. So for now, I sadly will have to give it a 9.75 as a placeholder to punish myself. I will re-rank this in the future to make it right.
Everything that lives is designed to end.
This may anger some of you, but I'll be honest, there's not a huge difference between Black and Sigma is more focused. The reason why I say this is because Sigma takes out puzzles and boss weaknesses. Are we really about to sit here and argue about bosses being made harder and the action being sacrificed for some puzzles? I prefer to just fight if that's the case. To a degree, you can say that Ninja Gaiden is one of the pioneers to character action games alongside DMC and God of War. Challenging bosses, challenging enemies, an in-depth combat system, mysterious characters, top-of-the-line action, punishing level design, a plethora of weapons, and Rachel! The game has a Ninja Trials mode where you kill and stab to your heart's content. No violations, 10 out of 10. I'm actually using the original version of this game for this one so you guys can put the pitchforks down. The Sigma version for 2 is a bit watered down and they changed the mission mode. The game is complete from start to finish, many challenging enemies and boss fights, which can only be defeated once mastering a set of skills. Progression is rewarded through hard work and causes you to want to get better. All games have negatives, but there aren't many for this title. I played this as a young lad, and if I could do it, then so can an adult who puts the time in. This game is most likely why I'm fairly decent at titles that fit this subgenre today, and it can be argued that it's the best of the trilogy. No violations, 10 out of 10. Now we're talking about Ninja Gaiden 3, then sure, you can say whatever you want, but its re-release titled Razor's Edge is on a whole other level. Combat that focuses more on aggression, but also demands you to be defensive, high-octane combat that bombards and swarms you around every corner, and you can play Ayane, Kasumi, and Momiji. The Ninja Trials mode is also really hard in this game. I don't know who was a masochist on the dev team, but I hope you're married with a loving family. That's not sarcasm. I respect a reasonable challenge. If you give me something challenging, I at least want to feel like I signed up for it. It's doable and requires skill to complete. No violations, 10 out of 10.
So, how does it feel to suffer as all of your victims?
This game is ridiculous. I mean that in a good way. While the combat may not be complex, it has the vibe of an old challenging game that you'd be proud of beating and saying you're one of the people who did it, even though it is one of those games due to it being that old. The story is funny, the characters are enjoyable, nice boss fights, tough levels, and the game overall can't get away with a lot of the stuff it used to due to the world becoming more soft. Something I have an issue with in the third game. You can tell that real world politics toned down the overall tone of the game. It's definitely a relic of the past that I can enjoy playing in the present. Violation 5. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? I would say no. It's pretty bare bones, but manages to somehow be more stylish than other games. No More Heroes scores a solid 9 out of 10.
Gotcha.
This may be a wild statement, but I actually kind of enjoyed No More Heroes 2 more than No More Heroes 1. And you want to know why? Honestly, I like the boss fights more. They were more challenging. The boss fights in the first No More Heroes were a bit too spongy. They took the open world out of the game and I honestly didn't mind it. I see No More Heroes as a boss rush game, so I didn't even bother getting upgrades for the sword to make my life easier. The game was a bit more outlandish than its first iteration, and at times the characters in the story were more enjoyable. For anyone who likes this subgenre, you'd like No More Heroes too. Other than that, there's not much difference with the first one. Violations 2 and 5. 2. Does the game have other modes? The world sort of operates like No More Heroes 1. where you can explore the world, but in this case, you just teleport to places for minigames. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? This game has never been known for having crazy combat, but it does have a few tricks that most people won't find out on the first playthrough. Not every game has to have air combos to be considered flashy. No More Heroes is one of those games that proves that. No More Heroes gets a solid 8.75 out of 10. See how I said I like this game a bit more than the first and I still scored it lower? Just letting that be known, okay? So we got that clear?
Some people fuck at funerals. I cut off heads.
This game is annoyingly demanding. The enemies will not die and your hands will hurt. I'm talking 30 hit combos on lesser enemies. And that's not one swing counting as 2 hits because I'm using twin swords. I'm talking 30 times I had to hit the button on one enemy before moving on to the next 1,000 in one room. While I'll admit I couldn't necessarily figure out the combat system to the fullest extent while I was playing, I have checked to see what other people could perform. So it checks out for me. I will also admit that I figured out the special moves for each character extremely late, so that's my fault. I could have made sections way easier on me if I had known. So you decide to play this game and make this tier list for whatever reason, don't make my mistake. I probably would have finished the game a teensy bit faster. Violations 4, 7, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level design? This game's levels are basically you being thrown into a room with a horde of zombies. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I wouldn't say they test your skills. It actually feels like a lot of the bosses weren't play tested. And when I typed that line down that you just heard, I actually wasn't thinking about this until now, but one of the bosses literally got locked into a corner in my first and only run of the game and couldn't fight back the entire time. So just so you know, I'm not lying. I wasn't even thinking about him until it dawned on me. Here is footage. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup, new enemies get introduced over time, but you're basically fighting the undead and some other monsters that appear extremely early in the game the whole time. The game gets a solid 8.5 out of 10. I share a lot of the same sentiment with this game. A lot of the mechanics were actually dumbed down and were made a bit more gimmicky. Well, I'm pretty sure Aya also had a counter in the Z2 Chaos, which I never used. She had this Sekiro-like parry that the game kept wanting you to abuse. I just ended up abusing dodge frames because the lock-on system in both games is terrible. The camera for this game and boss fight is overall bad. The only launcher from what I found was unresponsive. It didn't work in between combos. So you're telling me I have to start with the launcher and not be pressing any buttons? It reminded me of the parry from Metal Gear Rising, but at least that was more responsive than the only thing that led into an air combo for Onechanbara. Violations 4, 5, 6, 7, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? Same as the other game. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? While it has elements of stylish action, I want to say no. It's actually very bare bones in comparison to Z2 Chaos. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The parry system was pretty gimmicky. Some bosses were built around the idea that parrying was the main way to handle them. The issue is that the parry is kind of broken in a bad way. A lot of times it would be unresponsive, or my personal opinion is that it's almost as if it has a 15 to 20 frame startup. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Nope. The bosses are just annoying health sponges. The game, just like Z2 Chaos, feels heavily untested. And if anyone thinks I'm complaining, I have personal footage of a boss hitting me out of bounds during a section where I felt the parry wasn't working. Like I said, unfinished. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Same as Z2 Chaos. Onechanbara scores a 7 out of 10.
Shut up!
This game doesn't really have much to offer. You press X or square, depending on what controller you're using, and the characters do an auto combo. That's basically it. I honestly expected more from the footage I've seen prior to playing it, but that's basically it. As easy as it was, the enemies hit pretty hard. Violations 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? It has multiplayer, but like it says in the rule, I don't count that. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? No, it almost feels like the game was made with A and B concepts. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Not at all, it's just an auto combo paradise. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? No, the game feels untested at times, which makes you feel overpowered, or the mechanics feel as if they don't work. 8. Is the game littered with too many quick time events? Your main way of getting the upper hand is through button prompts, and if I'm being honest, it feels like they don't appear 20% of the time, which gives the enemy a free hit. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup, RWBY Grimm Eclipse scores a low 6.25 out of 10. I miss Monty.
Oh, that makes me dizzy.
You know what? I like this game. It has a decent story, and unlike God of War 2018 and Ragnarok, this game isn't cinematic, but it feels like it is at the same time. Just like Hi-Fi Rush, Soulstice feels like you're playing a game from the PS2 era or the early 360 era. The combat, while more complex than other games, could have used a bit more fine-tuning. I think the weapon switching mechanics should have been customizable so that when I switch the specific weapon I need for my combo at the current moment is readily available. The game was challenging at times, but I honestly felt that it was partly due to some jank in the controls and a lack of defensive options. The color-coded enemies kind of got on my nerves. It's cool for the first hour, but it starts getting tiring real fast when everything in the game, including combat, revolves around switching between red and blue. Why is that annoying? I'll give you an example. Sometimes the game will make it mandatory that you have to kill or weaken an enemy by slaying the blue mobs that spawn out of its body to prevent it from healing. In order to hurt red or blue enemies, you have to switch between a red or blue field manually. If you have a red field up, for example, you cannot hurt or kill a blue enemy. So when 4 blue mobs spawn out of a red mob that circles around them, it's a common occurrence that they'll float too close to the red mob, and your attack will either auto-track and aim at the red mob instead of the blue mob because they're too close. When the wrong color makes contact with the mob it's not associated with, you get staggered and animation lock. Another reason why this scenario is annoying, if you don't kill the blue mobs in time, the red mob will possibly heal to 50 or 75% HP after absorbing the blue mobs. So many times you have to pray that they somehow keep their distance. Whoever came up with this system needs help. The game did feel a bit repetitive, but the challenge it offers is pretty worth it on a first playthrough. Violations 2, 4, 6, and 7. 2. Does the game have other modes? No, I was really hoping it did too. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? The levels get very repetitive, it's just a game of what's red and what's blue. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? It has a bunch of gimmicks actually. I was not going to take the full points because you can tell the reason the game wants you to freeze people in place so much is to help build synergy for the Briar Go Stupid mode. I'll take half points. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I would say no. There's some grounded ones, but they're mostly cheap and gimmicky. I won't take full points off for this one though, despite a couple of hiccups. Soulstice manages to get a solid 8.75 out of 10.
We shall prevail.
Would you believe that I've wanted to play this game since it came out? I don't know why I never did, but it was worth it once I finally got my hands on it. I actually really enjoyed it. The frames would drop like the tolerance of my colon after Pepto-Bismol, but I still had fun. It's a welcome addition to the list, and I only wish I spent more time with it to understand the symbiote root of the skill tree. Maybe I'll boot it up again, but I think the score is fair because they're factual. Violations 2 and 6. 2. Does the game have other modes? If I'm wrong on this one, tell me, but as far as I know, Web of Shadows does not have other modes. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? I won't go hard on this one because the game literally can't be beaten without the use of the quick time web slinger move, but it made for some cool combos and decent interactions that I wouldn't be able to find in other games. 10 out of 10 experience, but the review points say otherwise. Spider-Man Web of Shadows is a solid 9.5 out of 10.
Be there or be square?
Be square? You from Queens or something?
Transformers Devastation is a decent experience that may not offer too much, but the boss fights are actually pretty fun. Multiple characters to play and learn. I personally played Bumblebee and was met with shock when they switched me to Optimus Prime by the end, only to reveal that Bumblebee does fuck all damage, so I was playing the game on hard mode and had to give myself a pat on the back. I'll admit, it was pretty repetitive, but it was a short game nonetheless. Clearly didn't have too much of a big budget or overarching narrative that it was going for. Violations 4 and 6. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? The levels don't really do much. You get thrown into a mission and you take out the enemies accordingly. A lot of the missions are basic and have the same structure as others. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The game has this mechanic where you press a button during the pause of an attack to keep enemies stun locked until the game says otherwise. There are ways to mix it up, and the game has mechanical complexity outside of that to make some sort of highlight reel, but for casual players, it doesn't really offer much but a rinse and repeat function to take advantage of plus frames on a staggered opponent. I will be taking the full 0.5 for that. Transformers Devastation scores a solid 9.25 out of 10.
Oh, Starscream! You survived.
Ultra Age is a game that felt like it was on a budget of ideas. I'm starting to wonder how many games are taking inspiration from DMC Reboot because it's starting to become apparent. The color-coded enemies thing needs to stop. This tier list isn't about story, but its story wasn't anything to write home about. The combat has complexity to it, but I didn't invest my time into figuring it out. The RPG mechanics kind of get in the way of experimenting. When your stats are more important than gameplay in a game like this, you're taking away from the player. Violations 4, 6, 7, 16, and 18. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? It's just go from point A to point B. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The color-coded enemies and weapons making some weapons be rendered useless in situations of 20 enemies in one area is an issue. I should be able to use all of them at the same time to experiment in combos. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The boss fights don't really test your skills or anything, it's just a matter of dodging or parrying right, and that sometimes feels unresponsive. We're taking the full points on 7. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? I'm not kidding, the game literally makes you fight bosses again like that one section in DMC 3, but in this case that sucks because most of them are literally just bigger versions of enemies you already fought. 18. Is the game littered with fetch quest and lazy quest design? The whole game is basically a fetch quest. Ultra Age scores a 7 out of 10.
It's always like this when we land.
I'll just say what we're all thinking. When it comes to slow-mo shooters, there's Max Payne, Matrix Reloaded, Wet, and Super Hot. But none of them really come close to our character action game in disguise, Vanquish. There's so many ways to mix up enemies in this game, it's not even funny. I think I played the game twice as a kid, so this is one of those games I bought twice. I don't think anyone will be disappointed playing this game. More people need to experience it. I'm actually going to play it again for the 3rd time in the future. With that being said, Violation 6. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? I will admit that the slowing down time thing is extremely gimmicky and OP once you learn how to really take advantage of it. This is a Shinji Mikami game, for crying out loud. There's gonna be some move you buy that's broken in some way or fashion. I'm taking the full 0.5 again. This lands Vanquish at a solid 9.5 out of 10.
Why is that thing still in the way? Someone take care of it, now!
I'm going to be completely honest, I'm burnt out on this list. I haven't forgotten any games. I know about a lot of games that are coming out. I know about a lot of games that are already out. They're already on the tier list, but I'm withholding the scores for now because there's a lot of games I need to actually play. I would appreciate it if you would take the time to subscribe to the channel. If you disagree with any of my placements on the tier list, that's cool. You can leave your thoughts in the comment section and I'll be willing to respond. I'm very respectful when it comes to sharing thoughts, so don't be afraid. I just want everyone to remember that these are not my personal placements. I went by the review system I crafted. A lot of these are great games that I'd recommend to anyone who enjoys stylish action games. And with that said, this will be broken up into possibly 3 videos. Not only do I have to write up reviews, I have to open up my wallet, keep track of the time I played, study the mechanics and overall game design of each respective title, make notes of the game while I'm playing, create a separate doc around game design, and even alter review points based around the games I've played. Needless to say, I'm burnt out. It was nice experiencing a lot of these for the tier list, and now I'm one of very few people on this earth who can make a tier list such as this who has actually had hands-on experience with these games. I'm not looking for sympathy, but it took a lot of work and research to hunt a majority of these games down. There's games I'm still researching and debating on adding to the tier list because they might be controversial. One of them is Prototype. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. I've seen some stuff that you could do, but I'd probably get yelled at. My dream for the future is to be able to do this tier list with indie titles, but I don't know when that's gonna be a thing. There's so many coming out, and that sounds like a 2027 tier list. I don't know. There's a lot of these are being made by singular people. There's a lot coming out soon, but we'll have to wait. I'll compile my findings in the next video. For games that'll be added in the next video, we have Thank you for your time. I have research to do and CRPGs to play and finally relax. I already felt bad not having Kingdom Hearts on this list and a bunch of others, but I'm only human and have responsibilities outside of my hobbies. I already gave this enough time as it is, and I can't wait to add these titles to the tier list when the time comes.